Thank you, Jerry, and thank you all for coming. Um, so I'm Marcin. I'm CEO and co-founder at UXPin. I also head our design operations team. My whole professional background is in UX design and psychology, and I'm extremely passionate about the intersection of design and technology. On a daily basis, I'm focused on scaling design development, future of software development in general, and of course, I love design systems and the new field of design operations, which is emerging just right now. As Jerry mentioned, UXPin is the full stack UX design platform. So we pay a lot of attention to scaling design practice with design systems. So in UXPin, design system is the central component of your design process that should be used in prototyping, and then we use design system to make documentation completely automatic. So I encourage all of you to give us a try, and of course let us know how you like UXPin. Couple of things about our organization. We have customers in over 150 countries, so basically all over the world. The company is still relatively small, 70 people across 2 offices in Mountain View and Gdańsk in Poland. And today we are going to talk about colors. And when I mentioned that I'm going to give a talk about colors to my coworkers and friends, they were laughing. And here's why. This is my Instagram page. So not too many colors. I should probably also mention that both UXPin offices have only white furniture. I mainly wear black and different shades of gray. You wouldn't see too many colors on me on a daily basis. And whenever I post on an Instagram a colorful picture, it basically draws attention of my friends and coworkers. So this is an amazing piece of art by Ellsworth Kelly, part of the San Francisco MoMA exhibition. This piece is called Spectrum One, and it's beautiful. Like it represents a nice, systematic view of colors. But the first comment to this particular picture is coming from one of my UXPin employees, and she's paying attention that this is not black and white, and it's on my Instagram. So people think that I hate colors and that I don't like to use them. I don't like them around me. It's not exactly true. So I assure you, you are in good hands. In fact, I like colors, but I like them when they are well organized, when there's logic to organization of colors around me, and especially in my design projects. I like colors that are functional. Colors are extremely powerful stimuli. And I remember that from my psychology years in college, that according to Anne Treisman and her theory of attention, colors are among stimuli that can jump through our cognitive filters and directly influence our behaviors. So there's a lot of power associated with colors, and we should respect the natural functions of colors, such as red, meaning warning. And also there's a cultural reference in colors. So there's a lot of meaning that is associated with colors, and I like to respect that. But I also like colors that are scalable. So I mentioned UXPin interior design in our offices. So like some people might like an orange desk, but the question is if a room full of orange desks is going to create this natural environment which is going to be productive, right? And I bet you it's not going to be productive. So orange in an interior design hardly ever scales, especially in an office setting. White, on the other hand, creates a nice, calm environment without unnecessary distractions. And I apply the same principle to web design and mobile design. Colors have to scale. The color palette has to scale. So I just like systems of colors. I like systematic approach to creating a color palette. And this is exactly what we are going to talk about today. So I'm going to tell you about the challenge that we faced at UXPin some time ago, and I'm going to tell you about the origins of this challenge. And of course, we're going to discuss how to actually create a color palette and how to implement a color palette in a design system. And then perhaps, the most difficult part of this whole talk is going to be maintenance of a color palette. So we have a little bit of practice, and thanks to our own design system in that area. So I'm going to share some thoughts on that as well. So all in all, we are going to talk about creation, implementation, and maintenance of a system of colors. So let's jump right into the challenge. So UXPin as an application has been launched in 2012. The company was created in 2010 with a slightly different product, but of course the same purpose of bridging design and development. But the application has been launched in 2012. Through the years, UXPin changed a lot. So the first change between 2012 2014 was a mainly architecture change. Like aesthetics did not change that much. We just needed to find a different architecture for the interface to really make it fit everything that we wanted UXPin to do. And then over the years, we're more focused on the aesthetics. But around 2015, like we basically took the wrong turn, and we used a color palette that was very difficult to scale across different features and parts of the product that we created. And soon after, we started to think about our own design in a more systemic way, like how to create a set of design principles that could serve us as a company for years to come, so we don't have to make all these changes every year or every 2 years. The project of redesigning UXPin, I mean, I hate this term, but it truly was a redesign, unfortunately, started with a set of design principles and a vision of the future of UXPin. So we set the direction for the company so we can make very mature design decisions. And frankly, we didn't make many mature decisions early on in the lifetime of UXPin because it was very hard to predict back in 2012 where we are going to end up. So the project took us, actually about 2 years to completely redesign UXPin. But on the way there, pieces of the old designs were still present here and there. They were present in pieces of interface which were rather hard to find for the users, but still were there. But definitely, the pieces of the old times were very visible in our code base. And that was gradually slowing us down and creating a challenge of maintaining the code, but also was creating a challenge of building new features for UXPin because there was a lot of uncertainty connected to all this, past pieces of design. And after analyzing what we have, we decided to, of course, build a design system, but we wanted to start with color first. And why? Because colors are among the most prevalent building blocks of any interface in the digital space. Colors are part of every element of the interface. Even if the element is transparent, it's taking the background from the lower layers. So colors is always there. And when we approach the problem of understanding where we are with colors, we just decided to create an inventory. And you've heard about that before. Whenever people are talking about starting a design system, it starts with some sort of an inventory, so you can really deeply understand where your design truly is and what's going on underneath the hood. And colors inventory, it's an interesting thing because it really points out the very strong connection between design assets and code. So of course you can try to just take all your sketch files, PSD files, or UXPin projects and just go through them and list all the colors. But here's the thing: only code is really relevant when it comes to the truth about user experience. So when we started to approach the problem of creating an inventory, we started to traverse all of our files with variables pointing at colors. And at UXPin, we use less as a CSS preprocessor. So this is how we are actually building up our files with variables. So we started there. And we started to go through all of them, and we started to list all the possible colors and all the variations in one place, because there were multiple variables files across our entire code base. And then we added also all of our style sheets. However, I have to say, if you want to go through all the style sheets and also find color definitions which are not set as variables in your CSS preprocessor, that's quite a challenge. And to do it, to go through this whole exercise of listing all the colors and creating an inventory might be a good idea to invite your team, because that's a lot of work. basically days of work if you want to be very, very precise. And like I highly encourage you to be very precise, because this inventory is going to be very useful at later stages of building your very consistent systemic color palette. And here's what we discovered after going through this whole exercise: pure chaos. So this is our inventory, a little video. It goes on, and you can see all the colors that were set as variables in our code base. We're not done yet, not yet. Keep going, right? So there's a lot of colors. A short summary: we found 116 color variables, 60 shades of gray, 15 shades of blue, 8 shades of red. That's a lot, and that's very chaotic, and it makes life of our, or it used to make our life of our designers and developers really, really tough. And like, to be frank, not all of these colors were actually used on production version of the application. Some of them were just ghosts of the past, and they just survived in the code base because like somebody didn't have time to clean up our less files during another iteration of the interface. And you could think, like, if this is just part of the less files or your SAS files or whatever you use, maybe that's not such a big problem, right? But in fact, the effect of all this chaos of colors is much deeper than just filling the preprocessor so proper CSS style sheets can be generated. It's much, much deeper. So the consequences of having such a mess of colors are, first of all, there's a possibility of bad user experience for users. If in any place colors that are not treated as a part of the system appear in the interface, there's a high probability that the very same interface elements or the same actions are going to be represented by different colors. And that's confusing because as users, we associate value with colors, and colors, as I mentioned before, have this privileged way to be interpreted by our brains. They affect attention immediately. So if you have different shades of gray, or that would be less of a problem, but different colors like blue and orange, let's say, associated with primary buttons, that might be extremely confusing. But it goes deeper. Environment with 116 color variables is very hard to control, and it basically kills the value of having stylistic variables in the first place. Why? Let's say that we would like to redesign UXPin again, which I hope not, but it will never happen. But let's say that we want to, and we want to replace this specific shade of gray with something else. If the code environment is leaking, meaning that there are colors not set up as variables, or multiple variables represent similar colors, or even the same color, then you cannot just simply change one variable and change the shade of gray across the entire interface. It's just impossible. So you're losing control over your user interface. But it goes even deeper. So, and perhaps this is the biggest problem. So if you have this kind of chaos of colors in your user interface, you slow down your entire team of designers and developers because they have to make decisions every single time they see a color in a project and they're coding a new piece of the user interface. They have to figure out, like, is this shade of gray already set up as a variable? Does it exist somewhere, or maybe not? And if it exists, if that's, like, if maybe this shade of gray was just a mistake of a designer, and perhaps, let's say, like, this shade of gray represented by 444, and like, let's say that this is like dark gray, maybe that should be 555, and all these thought processes have to be involved every single day in the work on interface, and that's just slowing down the entire team. So basically, we didn't have a system of colors. If anything, we just had a pure chaos, very hard to use. And as you perhaps remember, like I said, I like systems of colors. I like colors that are well organized and functional and scalable, and we didn't have it. And on the surface, like, the core of our interface starts to look very good. Like, we have this overall consistency, but we were still fighting all these details, all these detailed problems in our environment. And just a side note, so you guys can know what kind of approach did we use to inventorize all of our colors. This is just a little bit of a description. So it helped us actually avoid many problems afterwards. So it's an important slide. So first of all, we were always listing a file reference, right? So as you can see, like this is a piece of our color variables from editor 3.0. You know, like we have a separate asset repository for preview, for dashboard, for pieces of UXPin. So the file reference is important because if you want to get back there and find the specific colors, you want to know from which file they actually come from. Another thing, just for a representation value, so people can quickly see what's going on in this inventory. We have color swatches, and always there's a listed variable associated with this color swatch. It really helped us identify duplicates of variables and colors that are way too similar to be represented by different variables as well. So that was our approach to a color inventory. Hopefully this is going to be useful to your work as well. And I think to remember, you cannot be condescending. When you are creating an inventory, trust me, it's going to create a lot of tension on the team, because people, like especially developers, tend to blame themselves. Like if you point at the code base and you're going to say like, oh, that's messy, it hurts. Like it hurts all of us, people who can code. But in fact, like it's not anybody's fault. It's a systemic error which was growing for years. It was growing in our case for 5 years. We cannot blame a single person because that's just a lack of system in place that we didn't set up properly right at the beginning, right? So don't be condescending. Like it's a problem that's supposed to be fixed, and it's not anybody's fault on the team. Okay, so after this step, we had our inventory of colors, but it's not enough to just set up a color palette. You have to identify all the redundant colors that exist in the system, and that's a tough research. There are two approaches that you can take, and both are necessary in our case. So first of all, we wanted to just count all the colors in the system. So we wanted to understand if specific shades of gray are more prevalent than others. And if there are too close shades of gray to each other, like they have very similar hue, very similar lightness, we want to understand which one is the correct one. Which ones should actually stay in the system, and which should be matched and merged with the other one. So we have to calculate all of the colors in our system, and our senior UI architect just went through the code base again. Was looking for specific variables and just hex colors and RGBAs, and he listed all the colors. And the second thing is that you have to have discussion with your team. Like which colors to them seem most important, and especially with designers, like it's important to actually have this conversation. Like which colors we should keep in the system, because there's always a chance to change something, right? But which do we want to use and why? And we had this like long discussion about like which colors matter at UXPin, which should be treated as primary colors. All of that is very important for the next stage, which is setting the color palette. Thanks to both these exercises, we had data to be discussed with the team. So it was not only like a discussion. Okay, like I like 444. Like, and somebody else was like, I like 666. No, we actually had data pointing at like in across the entire code base, 444 is a more popular color, right? So maybe it's more important, or maybe not. But at least we use data as a beginning of the discussion, and then insights for the team were added on top of that. And we were hoping that we had enough information. Okay, so we have inventory, we have understanding of which colors are the most important in our code base, in our user interface. Now, how do you identify primary colors? That's quite a challenge. So I have my own formula how to deal with that. So here's how I like to think about your base colors, your primary colors in a system. So first of all, there are brand colors. There are colors that are a choice of a brand and are very strongly associated with the brand, and you cannot ignore them. They have to make it to your primary colors. And there are also the most prevalent colors of different color terms. So different colors, like you cannot have like three kinds of violets as your primary colors, or that wouldn't be advised. But if you have prevalent colors of different color terms, they, in my opinion, they should be part of primary colors. I'm going to explain why when we are going to talk about accent colors. And then I like to add to primary colors messaging colors to really emphasize the importance of messaging colors, such as, like error color and information color and warning color and confirmation color, right? I like to add them to primary colors to really make very, very obvious that they are crucial to user experience, and we should not mess up with them. So this is my formula, but honestly, there are different approaches, right? So IBM Carbon places messaging colors in the supporting colors category, and the branding colors are kept separate as primary ones. Microsoft Fluent, which is an amazing design system, I highly recommend, just check it out and see how such a robust system can operate. They have only accent colors. They give freedom to designers to apply primary colors that make sense to their product and also to their theme. And they have such a robust palette of accent colors. It's a very interesting approach. And perhaps my favorite example, design system created by the team at Shopify called Polaris. They have a beautiful set of primary colors, and as you can see, there are messaging colors included in primary colors. But something that I wanted to really emphasize is that the team at Shopify made an amazing job with describing when to use and when we shouldn't use specific primary colors when building an interface at Shopify. So whenever you click on the primary colors, you just get a very nice description of the usage guidelines, and I think this is a terrific thing to do, and also a huge inspiration to all the design operations team all over the world. So I recommend check out Shopify Polaris, amazing design system, very well prepared. So my approach is very similar to what Shopify did with their primary color palette. So here's a list of our primary colors. This is where we started. So UXPin has a brand color of the shade of blue. Like you can see that all over our interface, but also on our marketing sites. 006 CFF, a very vivid shade of blue, kind of aggressive as well. But we like it. It's full of energy, but also this calm energy. So that's really an awesome color. We use it all the time. But now, two most prevalent UI colors in our case are this kind of dark gray 444 and this lighter shade of gray F3, which we call silver. And then our messaging colors, right? So this is our primary color palette. And here's an example of how colors are used, like primary colors. They should be very visible on the website. So two screenshots of our homepage. You can see a primary button takes the brand color. The brand color also repeats itself across the website. 444 is used in different places, but also as our primary text color, right? So here's how it looks like. And when you have the primary colors, you have to take care of accents, right? So the supplementary color set. And this is like where color palettes become very, very difficult. And like there are different challenges associated with different products. We have a very specific challenge. So UXPin is a design platform, right? And when I mentioned that in 2015 we set up direction for years to come for our interface with a set of principles, one of the most important of our principles is that we don't want to draw attention away from your work as a designer, which means that our interface has to be nearly transparent. It has to be very minimalistic, so your design can kind of draw the most attention of anybody who views it or works on it, right? So we don't want to introduce any distraction to our own interface. What does it mean? Is that we have to be very careful with colors, right? We have to use mostly shades of gray, right? So to create the most neutral environment for design work. And it also means that we have to have a wide variety of shades of gray in our system as accent colors, so we can create necessary contrast across all the elements of the interface. And it's surprisingly difficult to play with the grayscale at this level and avoid all the contrast problems, which would just ruin accessibility of UXPin. And we definitely we've made some mistakes on the way when we're just learning and constantly improving the interface. It took us a long time to create like a stable design environment to actually have all the right contrast across the interface. But what does it mean to our color palette is that we always have to have a set of colors that our designers can use to emphasize the right things and de-emphasize the right things in the interface. And you cannot really just build it arbitrarily, because that will be just a set of decisions which are very hard to make. So early on, after setting up our primary colors, like you can see an extended version of our primary colors on the screen right now. Basically, some of the additional colors are also very prevalent in our interface, and we had to add them to the color palette, like this shade of violet. That's not important. The important thing is that we decided to derive our accent colors in a functional way using preprocessor functions, right? So we wanted to have a very easy tool to extend our color palette, but by making colors lighter or darker. So if you're familiar with LESS or SAS, both of these preprocessors have functions to make any given color lighter or darker. The functions are called lighten and darken, and basically just takes a definition of a color, can be variable, and a given percentage that you want to use to make color darker or lighter, right? So a very simple thing. We actually found it beautiful. We found this way of setting a color palette very beautiful on a couple of levels. So first of all, it's very flexible, right? It's very consistent as well, because it always uses one root color. So you can have like a palette of shades of grays that starts at the very same color, right? Like in our case, let's say this silver color F383 is like a parent color to the rest of shades of silver that we have in our palette. So there's an internal beauty to all of that. That's a truly systemic way of setting up the accents. But it also helps with communication, and we are going to talk about it in a couple of minutes. But here's the thing. There's a challenge with setting color palette in that way. And the challenge is that not all of our designers, and I bet that's the case that's also a case in your companies, not all of them code, right? So how can they suggest changes to a palette? How they can truly use this palette? How can they understand it? And you think like, okay, I mean, like you are just making colors lighter and darker. Like, what's the problem here? And the problem is that design tools and CSS preprocessors use different color models to manipulate the lightness of a color, right? So design tools, Sketch, Photoshop, Affinity, UXPin as well. Design tools tend to use hex colors, RGB, and HSB. And HSB is primarily used to set up a brightness of a color, right? So if you want to make a particular color lighter, like a little bit brighter, you manipulate brightness. CSS preprocessors, when you are using a function lighten or darken, the manipulation happens with HSL colors. So you are manipulating luminosity, not brightness. And there are completely different models. So a side note, very, very important one, Rune Madsen, terrific designer, is writing a book called Programming Design Systems. It's available freely online. I highly encourage you guys to check it out. He's just doing that gradually. And there's a terrific chapter about different color models, very in depth. So that would be too much for the purpose of this presentation, but I highly encourage you to just read through that so you can understand how colors exist in the user interface, and just in the digital space, in fact. So you have HSB on one side, HSL on one side, and as you can see, even on this simple illustration coming from Rune Madsen's book, they're completely different, right? So if you are manipulating brightness in Sketch, you're not going to get the same value as whenever you're manipulating, let's say, lighten function in SAS. It's going to be different, and this is a problematic thing. So how to deal with that? As a coding designer, I just felt like, okay, I'm going to build my own solution. This is pretty easy. I'm going to build a tool that we can use to to manipulate colors without actually running this SAS and less functions all the time and compiling our CSS files. It's just a simple color management tool, and I'm using HSL manipulation to basically build a color palette. Here's a little video of that. So this is the app that I built. You can just set up a given percentage and manipulate lighter or create lighter and darker versions of a color. You can copy hex. Automatically you get HSL and RGBA definition. You get a set of complementary color automatically, and then I compared the entire palette to give the contrast information for every given color. So this is like an alpha version of this tool. We are using it for a couple of months, building that on weekends and at night. So it's going to take some time until I will finish it. But once it's going to be finished, it's going to be freely available to all of you. So you can use that as well to communicate functional color palettes to your design team and let them also extend your color palette if that's needed without actually being in need of using preprocessor and compiling style sheets, right? So it's just a simpler approach and much faster as well. So this is coming up. And that was solution to our problem, like how to actually deal with this extended color palette. Here's our palette, so you can take a look at it. And this is already as part of our design system setup in UXPin. So it's an automatically generated documentation of our color palette. And you can see all these nice shades, lighter and darker shades of our primary colors here, neatly organized. So it creates a very systemic version of the color palette. And everything makes sense, right? Because it's derived with functions. It's not just a set of arbitrary decisions in colors. And we truly need all these shades to create an interface and also all of our marketing pages, and there's plenty of them, right? So we use a pretty robust color palette. Okay, so we have our color palette, and it is pretty far from being done. So here's another step, very important and very difficult. You have to name your colors, and naming is bloody difficult all across design and development, but especially in design systems when you want to make decisions, naming decisions for the entire company for now and for the future. So it's becoming highly complicated. So there are different approaches to naming colors in a design system. So some design systems like Polaris use natural or functional names. They have a combination of two. What does it mean? Natural color name would be like blue or indigo or purple, right? So they're just basically, they are what they are. They just point at certain mental concept, mental model of a color. But Spotify also use, no, that should be Shopify, I'm sorry, it's my mistake. Shopify also uses functional names such as title bar, right? Which points at specific usage of a color. Now, IBM Carbon, another great design system, uses generic name but also functional names. So they have this kind of mixture. So they have brand colors, and names of colors are just brand, right, with specific numbers. They have UI colors, so similar to UXPin, like grayscale, which they call just UI colors. But they have functional names. For text, they have text colors, right? So it's an interesting approach to naming colors. Microsoft Fluent doesn't actually name their accent colors. They just use hex values, but they do name colors when they are becoming part of themes for user interface, and then they use functional names. As you can see, like this is a screenshot of from their documentation. This is a set of colors for a list, and then you have like these specific colors are assigned to variables for this particular kind of a list. So that's a functional naming convention. We decided to use this as an opportunity, like creating a naming convention. We thought like, okay, that might be actually one of the tools that are going to connect design and engineering and create a stronger bond, so these people can work together more efficiently and just be happier as well and avoid miscommunication. So here's what we came up with. So first of all, on the ground level, our primary colors are using the simplest versions of the natural colors names possible. So our blue, it's not like a nightshade something, it's just blue. And then to indicate that this is the basic color in our system, we just added a suffix called base. So in our less variables files and soon in tokens, you'll see blue base. associated with the value of our brand color 006 CFF. But now accent colors, and this is where the magic happens. So we decided to name our accent colors in a very specific way. So first of all, kind of like a prefix to a color is coming from the primary colors. So like for any version of the blue in our design system, it will just start with blue, so people can quickly identify that this is actually taking a blue color. But then, as a suffix, we are using a specific function name used to derive this version of the color, so this accent color. So if you are thinking, if you are using UXPin design system, and if you are thinking about a lighter version of a blue, then you have a set variable in the system called blue lighten 15, right? And 15 is just basically the percentage by which the color is lighter or darker. It's a very simple approach. Now, why this is a communication tool for engineers and designers? Finally, if a designer change her mind and wants to make, let's say, like a shade of gray lighter, instead of coming up with a hex or RGBA value and like setting an alpha on that color, which is not the right way to do it, a designer can just say, okay, let's use gray lighten 30 here, and that's a very easy thing to say, and developer can immediately associate that with a variable existing in the system, puts that in code, and they can just carry on, right? So there's not a need for just a set of decisions around that, like what kind of shade of gray is that, and then communication is much easier. But also, well, it means that we have more control over the overall system, because people are not tempted to use something outside of the spectrum of variables defined in the system, right? Because our variables are just so flexible. So natural language and reference to the function used to create an accent color. That's our way of naming them. So far, like it's been a while, and it's working beautifully at UXPin. Okay, so we have at this point, after 5 steps, we had our color palette, we had our naming convention, the full color palette with primary and accent colors. So it seems like job is done, right? Not quite, because you have to implement this palette, right? So how do you do it? If you have a living organism and it's a complex organism, as complex organism as UXPin have, you have to find the old color definitions and find a match in the new color palette and then replace them. And how do you do it? Well, it's not an easy thing. We were thinking about using some visual regression tools to control implementation of our color palette, but unfortunately doesn't work because we have such a complex set of shades of gray. It will be very hard to distinguish which design decisions are the right ones. So here's what we had to do. We had to match existing colors with a new color palette, replace them, test manually, just go through the entire interface and understand whether it looks okay, whether we have all the right contrast values across the interface, optimize whenever needed, and repeat until we're very happy with the user interface. And of course, what followed was a set of user tests, which we do regularly at UXPin. And this is the tool, a very primitive tool that we created for ourselves to go through this exercise. It's just a spreadsheet, like a spreadsheet full of our old color values and new ones of color variables. And you can see that that basically says, okay, silver lighten 1, it matches this light gray background, and gray darken 5 is going to match all these variables. So then we created kind of like an assignment of old variables to new variables, and then we gradually replaced all of them and we eliminated them from the system. So sometimes, and that's an important note, I suppose, sometimes there wasn't like a direct match between our new color palette and the old colors, and then we had to look into the closest color to the color in the old chaotic color palette. So it was quite a lot of work to replace all the colors at UXPin, but definitely worth it because we regained control over our interface from the code-based perspective. So lots of work, but that's a necessary thing to do. Okay, so we are nearly done. We ended up with an implemented color palette. But in fact, like that's just the beginning of the challenge. So what happens if you implement a new color palette, but people keep reverting back to the old variables, or they just introduce color definitions outside of variables? What do you do then? Like, how can you maintain your beautiful, functional, scalable, and like systemic color palette if you don't have your team on board? So first of all, you have to take care of the distribution of your color palette. And what does it mean? What does it mean to distribute your color palette? You want to make sure that there's an easy access to the color palette for your developers and designers. So for designers, like no surprise, we use UXPin. So our color palette is represented in UXPin and Sketch for our designers, and they can just act upon all these colors. So basically, they don't have to make any color decisions outside of the palette, unless like in very rare occasions if they want to extend the palette. Because it exists in the design tool. It's the easiest thing in the world to set up a color from your design system if it's right there. Like if it's right there waiting for you and you have this set of base colors. So a very simple thing. And a magical thing about UXPin is that this whole color palette is actually syncing with the design system documentation automatically, right? So if there's a change in the design system, it's going to be reflected across all the accounts and all of the designers and developers automatically, so they always have the most recent version of the color palette. And of course, for developers, you have to make sure that they have access to the shared repository and everything is set up correctly so they can just use it in code. But well, I wish that would be the whole challenge of maintaining a color palette would be that easy, and I wish we could just like rely on the right access to colors in design tools and in development environment. It's not that easy, unfortunately. So another thing is you want to make sure that people understand the value of the color palette. They understand the structure of the palette. They understand the meaning of it, right? And the simplest thing you can do is just talk to them. You want to organize a design and tech talk. We actually kept both separate, but I could imagine having just one major meeting, especially if your designers are perhaps more technical and they like to play with the front-end code, then that would be a good idea as well. And you want to just kind of a similar to the presentation to what I'm doing right now. You want to explain why all of that makes sense, how this is empowering the team and giving them tools that are going to make their life easier and user interface much better, right? And experience for the users much better as well. So just like a design tech talk is a necessary step in the process of maintaining a palette. You want to make sure that they understand. Another thing is that you have to make a habit out of paying attention during code reviews and design reviews. And you want to be gentle. You don't want to become a design police and code police, but you want to make sure that people are actually using the color palette. And if they're not using the color palette, it means that there's probably something wrong with the color palette. If there's a pattern of people who just refuse to use the color palette, and they always come up with new variables outside of your naming convention, outside of what you created in the system, probably means that there's something wrong here, and it doesn't truly make sense. So instead of going for the full control and forcing people to use their color palette, if you have problems, systemic problems, and they happen all the time with the implementation of the color palette, you want to probably review your approach to creation of this color palette in the first place. So be gentle, be firm, but just pay attention. And it should be okay to just say okay, you didn't use the right variables in your less files, so we have to just create an issue on GitHub and correct that. But I wouldn't create automatic rules that are blocking commits if you are not using the right variables. I would just stop there and keep it on the conversation level. Okay. Finally, and perhaps the most importantly, to really maintain the color palette, you have to welcome improvements. And in our case, it happened as soon as we actually finished the palette. Our designers, they started to use it, and they were thinking okay, we need to eliminate this particular color. And in our case, we got rid of our mint color, which was used in multiple places in the interface, but designers were just like, okay, this is just introducing too much chaos. We have to replace it with our green color. And like the contrast was not high enough. It was not like logically was not that different from our green color used for confirmation of messages. So they wanted to eliminate that, and we welcome this as an improvement because why not, right? And some shades of gray were added, some were eliminated from the color palette, and it's fine. We keep it as a conversation as long as the entire team can actually agree on what the current version of the color palette is, as long as it's distributed, as long as it's in full sync between design environment and the code environment, then we are good, right? The color palette should not be set in stone. It should be part of the living design system. I would not recommend, again, becoming a design police as a design operation team. And the final thought, design system should serve and empower. It's not a control tool, it's an empowerment tool. So you want to make sure that you are creating something that's going to be used by the team on a daily basis, something that they're going to love, something that's going to make their life easier. And with that, I'm done. That's the last slide. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to hear your questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Marcin. That was great, and we definitely have a few questions here. So before we dive into the question, I will go ahead and drop in some final notes. And as Marcin mentioned, of course, using UXPin was a part of the process and helped us learn about what we needed to build in our own tool as well. So if you guys want to play around with UXPin itself, we do offer a free trial. I dropped the URL right there, www.uxpin.com is where our free trial is available. And now we will go ahead and run a poll and dive into some of the questions that we've got here. So one person here is curious, when it comes to designing colors for accessibility, what were a few priorities that really stood out in terms of like accessibility requirements?
Yeah, so it's always a challenge of setting up the correct contrast and making sure that designers actually know that, for example, with our brand color, you only can set up text in white on this particular shade of blue. Nothing else really works, and it cannot pass the web accessibility guidelines tests for the given contrast level. So what we did in our color palette, and what I generally recommend, is comparing pairs of colors and documenting that. So the little tool that I showed you that I'm building myself is just doing that automatically. So I'm setting up all the colors in the palette, and then I'm generating a list of color pairs so you can see like how these two colors actually play with each other and whether that makes sense. Nathan Curtis and the team at 8 Shapes, they created an interesting tool that builds like a matrix of colors set up in a color palette and then compares every single pair as well and returns a contrast value. So to create an accessible color palette, you have to make sure that all the colors have the right contrast level. But all the colors that are actually going to be used next to each other. So you want to make sure that if there's a foreground, which is a text, and a background, then there's a sufficient color between these two.
Gotcha. And the next question we have here is actually about when you mentioned that the best practice is to talk with the team about which colors are the most important, right, for functional purposes or for branding, and it's helpful to use data for that discussion. What kind of data were you referencing?
Yeah, so here's our story. So actually the most prevalent shade of gray in UXPin was a shade of 666, right? And it was a close close number of appearances in code to 444, but 666 was slightly more popular. And we wanted to, initially, as a design and operations team, we wanted to use 666 as our root primary color shade of gray, and then we wanted to create a scale of light and dark shades of gray, which has 666 in the middle, right? But after talking to our design team, they said that this is not the right primary colors because they are actually planning to replace 666. And they want to use as a root color 444, which is like they started to implement in some of the newer parts of UXPin interface. So data was suggesting 666, but conversation was suggesting 444. And like in design operations, you have to listen to the team. So in our case, we just were like, okay, I'm like, maybe when it comes to the functional approach to building a color palette, 666 makes more sense. But in fact, if our design team is not going to use it as a primary color, it doesn't make any sense at all. And we just decided to switch to 444, and then we had to split our shades of gray into two parts. So that's how we ended up with silver. But that was an example of a discussion and a decision that was between data, so the number of usage of colors in our code base, and the insights from the team. So the data is basically like number of appearances of a specific color in code base. Yeah.
Gotcha. And the next question is more around timing. So this person is curious, how long did it take to clean up all of the colors from start to finish?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. That was the whole color palette change, if I remember correctly, took 3 sprints, so 6 weeks. So that was the whole process of changing that. Implementation was at least a sprint long, so at least 2 weeks of work was just going through that. But here's the thing, like replacing and like matching color variables with another set of, so matching or assigning new variables to old variables, like that's a simple task from the code perspective at least. But something that took a lot of time was actually manually testing the interface, because UXPin is quite a big app, so we had to test on multiple monitors, like multiple people had to participate in tests. So we wanted to make sure that everything is set up correctly and adjust as we wanted. So that was quite a task to go through that. So far in our design system work, I was probably only matched by finding a new order in our icon set. That was also quite a task to implement. But like total in our case, at least 3 sprints or 6 weeks. But it also depends, like on the size of the team. We invited some people outside of design operations to just help us with this task as well.
Right. And the next question is, so this is interesting. How do you resolve color palette ownership between marketing and branding and design and user experience teams? So for instance, this person's company has 7 brand colors that sometimes are just used randomly as part of the brand identity, and those guidelines can actually conflict with color functionality.
Yeah.
Where do you find the balance between?
So that's a great question. Fortunately or unfortunately, we didn't have too much of a problem here. So typically you don't build 2 separate palettes for like marketing purposes and for product purposes. You're supposed to have one color palette, and if you just go through like major design systems out there, they would have just a unified color palette. Isn't like an interface of a product should be part of the brand guidelines, should comply with brand guidelines by all means. So it has to be a dialogue of sorts. In our case, what I was actually really worried about, and I've seen this question on chat, like people ask like, why do we need so many different shades of colors outside of the grayscale? Like, why do we need different shades of blue or purple? We need them because we have a lot of marketing pages, in fact. So we want to have a consistent color palette across all of our marketing pages as well. Like you've probably seen our our books, could publish over 100 free ebooks, or all of our webinars out there. There's also like probably dozens, if not hundreds already. So they have separate landing pages. So we need a lot of colors to be used on that. But I also, when we were setting up our color palette, I was really afraid that our marketing designers are not going to use the color palette because they are going to desire even more flexibility, which at that point we couldn't really afford. Like there are certain constraints of a color palette because you don't want to have the entire color spectrum as a color palette because you are basically losing the control over the entire thing. But in fact, like our marketing designers were first to use the color palette, and they were very curious about this, and they actually told me that this is making their job easier because they don't have to make all these arbitrary decisions based on their current sense of aesthetics. They can actually build something that's going to comply with the overall system, which was also welcomed, of course, by developers working with our product marketing team, because it just made everything much, much easier for them as well, right? They finally could use a set of variables shared with the entire ecosystem. So while I don't have experience in, setting a color palette for a very large company, when the brand organization is very powerful and big, I would definitely encourage you just try to set up one color palette and solve it with a dialogue. And yeah, so sorry I don't have more specific guideline, but this is a great question.
Yep. The next question is, you talked about testing on multiple monitors. So what would you recommend somebody do if in that process you find a color that actually looks really off from monitor and monitor? Does it make sense to go back and revisit that particular color so that it is altered to something that is more consistent across devices and monitors?
Yeah, so so that's a tough thing at UXPin, because typically what I would say is that you want to test on monitors or on screens that are used by your users. And so I spent years working in e-commerce, so we would just test stuff on shitty screens because we're just designing for the for average user of the internet, right? That was a very big e-commerce company. But at UXPin, our users are designers and developers, so they tend to have pretty good screens. So we always wanted to make sure that on Retina displays everything looks good. And I wouldn't say necessarily that in our case that was a question of how colors appear on the screen. It was more of the question of the contrast level, and that was very, very important. So we wanted to see whether two colors on different screens have the right contrast level, and to be very specific, it was all about the shades of gray in UXPin. So on a highly precise, with a huge color spectrum, professional monitor, it can look completely different than on a laptop display. We didn't discover a good method of actually make it automatic to make sure that everything appears as we wanted. So we were just using every monitor that we could get a hold of to understand that the interface looks as it should.
Gotcha. And let's see here. The next question is, how did you account for transparency in colors and overlapping of gray for, say, like modals and colorful backgrounds?
Oh, yeah. So this is a great question. So a mistake that we've made before actually we started to work on our design system, so years ago, was using sometimes transparency to make a color lighter. And I'm hearing about it a lot from different teams, and that's a very popular mistake because it seems like, okay, you have RGBA, you want to make color lighter. If the background is white, just you manipulate this value, make it a little bit transparent, and you're good to go, right? The problem is that this is going to come back and just bite you in your ass, right? So that's a big problem, because if the background color changes, then your color is going to change. So one firm thing that we are avoiding is using transparency for anything but making colors transparent. So it sounds weird, but here's the thing. So if you are in need of a transparency on an element of the interface, such as overlay behind model window, then that's the right level of transparency. And in our case, we would, for example, just use our one of our colors, like let's say primary shade of gray, so gray base, which is 444, and then we would set up transparency on this particular color. And if I remember correctly, this is how we are using it for overlays on model windows. So that's the only use case for transparency set up in our interface. So we are not. So I've seen some design systems which are using transparency as part of the color palette. We don't. We are just treating that as a functional piece of the interface for very specific use cases. I think a related thing is that I've heard from some people is that like we are just using lighten and darken functions to direct our color palette. For some companies, that's not enough. And they cannot get to the right colors with these two functions. But you can use different functions in SAS and less, to derive your colors. You can blend colors with white and black to derive a different colors. So I don't want you to think that our way of building accent colors is just the only way to do it. So if lighter and darker versions of primary colors do not fit your need, use by all means, use different functions. I think our naming convention fits that very well because you can just have blue blend something, right? So you can build a color name based on that function that you used. And transparency is not the right way to set up colors because you're losing control over this particular set of colors, because if you're using transparency, you cannot put particular components on any kind of background because it's going to be affected. And there are few cases in which this is actually what you want to achieve. And yeah, I hope I answered this question.
Right. And since we are coming up on the end of the hour, we will take the last question here, which is, so how would you say is a good way to get buy-in for creating color consistency if the process can take a while, let's say 6 to 8 weeks? Is there a certain places that maybe we can cut from to shorten the process?
That's a good question. Like I don't know if you can necessarily rush through the process. And in our case, we didn't want to just like ship a partial version to our production servers. So we're just having a separate branch, and we just were working on implementing Palette over there before the final launch. And also, colors in some cases, especially if you're building a tool that uses a lot of shades of gray, such as UXPin, colors might be really dangerous to your overall user experience. So you really want to make sure that the job is done, and you want to make sure that you actually have the version of user interface that you're proud of, and like it's accessible and all the contrast level are set up correctly. So I don't know if there's something that you can cut from the process to actually make it faster. However, it still should be an agile process. So as you maybe noticed, I mentioned that it took us 3 sprints, so 6 weeks. So at the end of every sprint, we had something that was delivered. It wasn't delivered to the production servers, right? So in the first sprint, we had our entire color palette set up and naming convention. And the second sprint, we already had our naming convention implemented in less files, and I think partially implemented in the interface as well, but it was only implemented on one branch. And then on the end of third sprint, we had the full version on the production server. And I wouldn't change anything in this process, after going through it.
Got it. Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us here today. We couldn't get to all the questions, but the conversation continues on Product Tribes here. And this is our community of 6,000 product designers, developers, and product managers. So if you have more than 3 years of experience working on a product team, we encourage you to apply for the community. And next week, we will have Caleb, who works, or sorry, not next week, actually. This week, we will have Caleb speaking about his work on Shopify design system. So that will be pretty insightful. He used to work at Salesforce Lightning. And then next week we'll have Sophia Wojciechowski, who's going to talk about object-oriented design, which is a methodology that certainly helps when working with design systems and modular design. And with that, thanks everybody for joining us today, and hope to see you around at the rest of the sessions.
Thank you all.